Just a note before we start. Our show talks about touchy subjects that may be difficult for some of our listeners. Take care of yourself. If you feel you need to seek help, see the links at the end of our show notes for resources.
Hey y'all, and welcome to Touchy Subjects Podcast, the podcast that aims to break the silence that tends to come with conversations around domestic and sexual violence. I'm Sean.
And I'm Amanda.
And today we're going to be discussing recognizing signs of abuse with our special guest, Heather. So thank you for joining us today, Heather.
Thank you for having me. This is fun.
Yeah, this is going to be a really fun conversation. We've already had fun just chatting with you prior to the recording, so we know it's going to be great. But before we dive into the discussion today, would you like to quickly introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Heather Claus. My friends call me Nookie. That's a long story, but a fun one. I have lived an atypical life. I've hitchhiked across the country. I've traveled and worked in a carnival for a season. I've roamed New York City with street people. I've explored and taught alternative lifestyles. I'm ADHD. I'm kinky. I'm non-monogamous. And I was an abused wife. I was in an abusive marriage, and it took me a long time to admit to myself that I was in an abusive marriage. It was emotionally abusive for many years. And then I left, and he got better. So I went back, and then I left again. Finally, my final leaving was on the threat of physical violence with a shotgun. And I think that was like having ice water poured over my head. It was just the final, like the big thing after all of these things. I'd been boiled like a frog, just slowly the heat had gotten turned up, and I was invested. And so when I finally left for the second time and for good, I spent about a year of my life in sort of like a self-imposed hermitage, except for work and errands and that sort of thing, walking my dogs. I kept very much to myself during that year because getting out of that marriage, I looked at who I was before the marriage, and I looked at who I was in the marriage, and I said, this cannot happen again. Like, I cannot do this. I don't want to do this. This is absolutely ruinous. And how did I get from there to here? And so I spent a year essentially examining my 15 years with this person, 11 years married, and looking at all of those times in hindsight where I could have stopped things, I could have ended things, and I did not. Not in order to take blame on myself. The blame is entirely on him for the things that he did. But to regain my power, to realize that I had power over the situation in every single one of those instances, and I did not use it for my own reasons, right? I didn't know any better, but also I wanted whatever it was I thought I might lose by leaving the relationship or by speaking out or whatever. And that led me to a lot of introspection. It led me to a lot of realizations, and it led me down what is now a 17-year journey into learning more about love, sex, romance, how people interact with each other, and how we as humans abuse each other, mistreat each other because we don't know better, because of the ways we've been socialized, and how that can lead to, things like what I experienced, which is the threat of violence with a shotgun, and things what other people have experienced, which is actual, ongoing violence within relationships.
Well, thank you for sharing those parts. We know it can be a challenge for some people to share those really scary things that they might have experienced in their abusive relationships. So thank you for doing that. And I also really like the use of the being boiled like a frog analogy. I know Amanda's used this analogy multiple times on our podcast, but if you're unfamiliar with the analogy, it's just if you put a frog into a pot that's boiling, it's immediately going to jump out. But if you slowly turn that temperature up, its body starts to acclimate to the heat until it's too late, and it will be now in boiling water. So it's a good analogy to look at abusive relationships, because if the person was abusive, like initially, you recognize like, oh yeah, this was they're abusive. Like, I'm not going to get in this relationship. I can't date this person. And you would get out right away. But because they're not abusive up front, they're going to be loving and caring. And slowly, when some of those earlier red flags start popping up, you might not recognize them. So by the time it gets to the ones that you do for sure recognize, like being threatened with a shotgun, it's too late. Like, you're already in the abusive relationship. They already have that power and control.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And it's the thing for me is that I was struggling with my own belief systems and socialization while I was going through that. Like, I was raised probably like many people today, especially of my generation. I'm about to turn 51, to be an independent woman, right? To know that I was going to, have what I wanted if I was ready to go for it. And yet society gave me this idea about marriage that radically changed how I behaved without even realizing it. Like, marriage, and we've all heard it, right? Marriage is forever. True love is unconditional. If you really love someone, you will stay and support them and help them through whatever. In the case of my partner, it was both alcohol addiction and mental health issues, bipolar disorder. And so I believed that to be a good and right person, I had to stay, right? This is what you do if you love someone. And if I left him, then did I really love him at all? And that was also on me, right? Like, those are the thoughts in my head that I had to learn. I was trading my mental health for an idea.
Yeah.
And when I realized that, I was like, mind blown, right? Like, wow.
Right. I mean, so we hear all the time, right? Like, oh, relationships don't last like they used to. Like, grandma and grandpa were together for 75 years and were there until the end. And, that's because they worked things out and they, truly had this commitment to each other and blah, 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 blah. No, I mean, grandma and grandpa stayed together because grandma didn't have a choice, right? Like, when
Grandma
you're
couldn't
talking
get a loan
about
for a house.
grandma couldn't get a loan for a house. Grandma couldn't get a credit card to, have some sort of help in a financial emergency. Like, grandma had 6 kids that she stayed home to take care of because that's how things were back then. So there's this societal idea that's still ingrained in so many people. Like, no, stick it out. It's worth it. You got to, be with them through the good and the bad. And while that's true to a point, I mean, not every relationship's going to be sunshine and rainbows for the whole time, especially if you're together for 50, 60, 70 years. There's no way. But there are some things that you can't work through. You shouldn't work through, and you shouldn't sacrifice yourself to try and work through it for someone else.
And I think that's going to be different for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, there are people, for example, like, one of the things I realized that I had been trained in a relationship after my marriage. I remember very distinctly being in a car with my then boyfriend, and we'd been together for like 3.5 years at that point. And he was doing something that just made me ragey. And I snapped at him. Like, I yelled in the car. And he was like, oh, whoa, I didn't know it was like such a big deal. And I'm like, I have told you like 80,000 times. And he said, yeah, but I didn't know you were serious because I had never yelled at him about it. And I realized at that moment that our relationship was going to end because I didn't want to be in a relationship where I had to yell in order to be heard.
Yeah.
And there are some people I know who love being able to yell. Like I have a friend who is, and yes, Italian, but like super over dramatic and super this. And she loves being able to yell and have her partner receive that in the way it's intended, which is like a big spat and then it's done, right? Like done. So it's going to look different for each person. And I think that that's really, really key because a lot of people, especially like these days, go online and say, is this okay? And you're going to get, 83 different answers on Facebook in some sort of relationship group. And that's from 83 different people who none of whom are you.
Yeah.
You need to decide if that's okay. Is that affecting your mental health? Because if it is, that's the issue you need to focus on, not whether I think it's okay or Sean thinks it's okay or Amanda thinks it's okay or, Dr. Filibuster thinks it's okay. Is this good for you? Is this healthy for you?
And it kind of goes into like how I also end up viewing like the discussion we had about or mentioning the unconditional love. I always feel like love, at least for the most part, should be conditional.
Oh,
right? Like there's going to be
yeah.
conditions that I'm cool with and not cool with. Those are like my deal breakers. And once that condition is broken, like it's done. Like
Yeah.
you should have conditions on what relationships you're staying into, because if that relationship isn't good for you, you're putting yourself in a bad situation now, and you're ignoring maybe some of the boundaries that you've set because those boundaries are your conditions.
Or maybe like, and this is a big thing. Like for me, I found out that a condition was not being threatened by a shotgun.
It's a pretty good one.
It's a good one.
Condition,
It's a good one.
this is good. But also, like, I didn't know that ahead of time. I had never fathomed that was going to be a condition that I'd have to set in any relationship I'd ever been in, right? Because I mean, I got to be honest, I had, as much as I can, figured out, an idyllic childhood, right? Like my parents loved me. I was an only child. I was supported. I was told I was beautiful. I was told I could do anything. And it never occurred to me when I went out into the real world and fell in love that person wouldn't love me the same way my parents did, right? Wouldn't support me. That love didn't mean that they supported me and that they were always looking out for my best interest in the way that I thought love was supposed to be. So I think it's also important to know that as we go through relationships, boundaries or conditions, or, I've called them non-compromisables, will change and grow as we do. And that could be something like you start out a relationship thinking you want this thing, I don't know, to travel all over the world. And then it turns out that you're kind of like me and you've got ADHD. And every single time you travel, it takes you almost as much time to get back and get back into your routine as it does to travel. And you start thinking, okay, maybe we shouldn't travel quite as much. That's going to change your relationship if you build a foundation on something else, right? And that creates in a lot of relationships what I call this shame escalation pattern. So when I wrote a book called Fight Less, Love More. When I talk about fighting, one of the things that I talk about is this shame escalation pattern. So I say to Sean, Sean, I love you dearly. I cannot do this thing that we have been doing for the past 4 years together. Sean immediately feels shame that he has harmed me potentially doing this thing and gets defensive about it, and then immediately has to convince me this thing is not bad. You like this thing, in order to push that shame away from himself. And that creates an escalation from conflict into fighting, and possibly in many cases, we see this, into abuse and violence. These are human things, right? Like, we all do this. And it's terrifying to think about how much we don't know until we pause and we really take a deep breath and say, this has happened to me in my life. And now I can move forward with the power of saying yes or no over every situation that I go into.
Well, and it also kind of starts to feel like this plays a little bit into how we mentioned earlier too. Like, people are afraid of like admitting the relationship might be a failure. Is if both of you, for example, started off where you both like traveling, did it all the time, and one person still really, really wants to travel and see a bunch of stuff, but one person doesn't. Yeah, there's compromises that you could work on. Like, okay, so we won't travel as much, but we still might be able to do it sometimes. But if that person's very big desire is to travel and see the world, and their partner no longer wants to, are they, one, going to feel comfortable doing that on their own without their partner? And if they're not going to, is it okay to admit that maybe this relationship, they're both not going to get what they want out of it anymore, and the relationship itself has just ran its course?
I mean, my answer to that is yes, please. I hope that, if you're going to have, because I mean, you've got two options, right? You can accept the way things are and then choose to collaborate on creating a relationship that supports both of you in whatever your current needs and desires are. Or you can try to control each other and force each other into the boxes that you've created for each other in your heads, which not so positive.
Yeah.
One of those things is likely to work out, and one of those things is not likely to work out.
Yeah. But the thing is that we also do see that second thing, quote unquote, working out. If by working out, you mean they stay together, right? They stay together, and then they're constantly pushing at each other and nitpicking and, putting each other down. Like, I met this couple several years ago, and within the first half hour or so, I was just, wow. And one of them said to me, "Oh, no, I really do love my partner. It's just hard to tell." And I'm like, yeah, it is. Right. And for them, maybe this works. For me, I see it as, I would see it as like somebody constantly attacking my decisions and not, playing the loving partner that I would expect. And we see this all the time, right? We see it in our parents. We see it on TV. Couples that are like constantly bickering, and we're supposed to be laughing.
Yeah.
So it's a socialization. We think this is okay. We think this is normal. It is normal. But is normal in that way what you want out of your relationships?
So this feels like a good kind of part to transition just a little bit, Heather, into, because you had mentioned all of like looking back on the relationship to figure out which were those signs that you saw that were like, maybe that was a good point, or maybe that was a good point. Because we can see that in the things that we're like watching in TV shows and movies too. When we have those relationships where they're like, oh, I don't think I would like that in my relationship, or why is she staying with this guy who's clearly an asshole? So when you were looking back then on that relationship, what were some of those signs that you ended up seeing?
Well, so the easy one is like the first time that he took money out of my wallet without permission. And the time when I really realized like that was an issue, was only afterwards, looking back, when he had done it so many times, that I had actually started hiding money in places like in books and so on and so forth. And then I couldn't find it again when I needed it, right? Like, this is how ridiculous it got over, I don't know, 7 years of the arc of abuse and so on and so forth. Before those 7 years, I was with him for 15 years. We were married for 11 years. Before those 7 years, I would say it was just a generally young and dysfunctional relationship. Those 7 years are specifically marked by when he got injured and started drinking more, and his mental health started deteriorating. There's also, like things like when I got a new car. I had saved up my money to purchase my first new car ever. I bought myself a convertible. After buying it, we went out one night and I was like in the bar talking with people, and I was telling him how excited I was about my new car. And afterwards, he told me, and this was not the first time he told me that I was socially awkward, but he told me that I was bothering people, bragging about my new car and making them feel, like less than because they didn't have a new car or whatever it was. And it hurt, right? Like, I don't want a partner who's going to be like that, who's going to try to make me feel less than. And I also didn't understand it because I'm neurospicy. And I was like, but if they didn't want to hear about it, why didn't they just stop talking to me? Right? Or change the subject, right? But it stuck with me. And I still, like, even to this day, have these little like brain worms that'll once in a while rear its ugly head and say, you are desperately awkward at socializing. Whereas people have told me that I'm not at all. I mean, so there's that. And then there's this story. I'm going to share it with you. I don't talk about this too terribly often, but so one thing to know about me is, part of my neurospiciness is ADHD. Part of it is empathy deficit disorder. So I've never really been like superhuman. Like I don't have empathy the way other people do. So like, I've never really been able to read a room the way a lot of people could naturally. And so I felt a little awkward and sort of out of things, right? Which is fine. I also didn't realize when I was younger that I was a very, very pretty young woman. It never occurred to me because I was always so intellectual and geeky and, whatever, kind of that movie trope, right? Like, it just, take off my glasses and suddenly, right? And he was Paul, he was beautiful. He was strong. He was charismatic. He was sexy AF. He was a physical trainer in New York City to the stars. Like, he had been from the moment I met him, whereas I was just kind of like me, right? He never told me I was beautiful, but to me, that didn't really matter because that wasn't who I thought I needed to be, right? Like, I was an intellectual person, and he liked my brain. He liked my athleticism. He liked my business success. Something else he liked, though? Tall blondes. I'm 5'6", and I am most definitely a brunette, and I am super curvy. And he liked, tall and willowy and, model types. But, we hadn't really been connecting for a while. And so I thought, let's mix things up, right? Because I bought the books, right? Like the How to Spice Things Up in Your Relationship books, like the, here's how to, get people to finally pay attention to you and make things hot again type books. And so I thought, okay, I could be blonde, right? So I planned it for a week. I bought the lingerie, I bought the honey powder, the makeup that I didn't have, the fine chocolate, a single malt. I bought candles, shoes with high heels, like stripper heels,
Mhm.
I bought the long blonde wig. And so the night of, I had the candles lit. I took a last look in the mirror, and like, I didn't recognize myself, but I was like, okay, I look pretty good for an awkward, sort of brainy girl, right? This is going to be fun. I mean, my hopes were high. My spirits were like way, way up there. It had been a while since we'd been intimate, and I just knew this was this was going to change things. And it'd be the start of like a new life together. And when I heard the front door open, and I was so like nervous, I could barely breathe. And I was like so excited and happy, and heard him coming down the hall. And as he comes in the door, I smile as brilliantly as I can. And he took one look at me, and he walked away. And he slammed the door. And he was gone for hours. And I cried myself to sleep. And when he finally came to bed, he did not touch me. Very carefully did not touch me. And the next day he screamed at me that I looked like a whore. That he couldn't believe I would ever think of doing something like that to him. Right? That only a slut would wear that color of red lipstick. And how could I have ever imagined that he would have married such a pathetic, unlovable excuse for a woman? And that was my first time I ever tried to be sexy. And I was 32. And that killed a part of me inside, in ways that took me years to unpack and get over. My husband, the man who claimed to love me more than anyone else in the world, walked away from me with disgust on his face. It still took me another 6 months after that to leave him for the first time, and then I still went back to him. But again, looking back, right, that was a culmination for me of the little things, like the stuff in the bar. You're awkward, you're weird, people don't really like you, you don't say things right, you don't do the right things, whatever. All those little things that were just kind of like little tiny needles, that was the big thing. That is when I truly realized that I did not have the love and the support and the desire that I thought was a part of being in love and being married to somebody.
That story breaks my heart. Like, I hold grudges for other people, and I'm going to hold this grudge for you for the rest of my life. I don't know who this man is. I will never see him, probably, but know in your heart of hearts that I hate him.
Yeah.
And that if I ever see him, he's going to get an earful. And I'm going to carry that with me forever.
Being separated from that now, by nearly 20 years. I mean, I don't know if you can tell that I'm all verklempt about it anyway. I'm still like, I'm misty-eyed. But being separated from that, there's a couple of things I can say in his defense. One, he had been drinking. Two, I know what I'm offering here are reasons and not excuses. Two, he was struggling very strongly with his mental health, and anybody who's familiar with bipolar disorder knows the kind of things that whispers in your mind. And three, he was also struggling very strongly with a strict Catholic upbringing that we had tried to step away from and came crashing back on him. Now, again, all of these things are reasons for what was going on in his head, They are not excuses for allowing what went on in his head to harm me. So I can both feel the depths of that, and feel compassion for somebody that is so hurt in their soul that they live with thoughts like that in their head, when what I was really trying to offer was deep love and connection. Right. So
Yeah.
It doesn't, I don't take any of the blame for that at all. And I feel awful for the people who go through, these types of things as well. Mental health is no joke. And the demons and the socialization we're raised with is no joke. And then looking at that, going back to what we were talking about, from the other side of the relationship, knowing that was not healthy for me. Yeah. And I did not protect myself from it. Looking at that and realizing, by doing this work, by seeing that, by also knowing all the little tiny things that led up to it, that allowed me to spot this sort of behavior in people much earlier. So real quick, I'm going to do a quick segue because I love this. So one of the things I did in that year is I started reading every psychology book, every love, sex, and romance book I could get my hands on, including, because this was the early 2000s and the heyday of online, including ebooks. And I ran into a bunch of ebooks by what are now known as pickup artists. And I joined that community as Nookie, but I also joined that community several months later as a masculine persona. So I could see both sides of things. And one of the things I learned is, I learned a ton of things about how they manipulate and use emotion to get what they want out of women. And there are also some women pickup artists, but one of the things I learned about, and many of us have learned about, is the neg, right? The little, I'm going to cut you down in tiny little ways so that you want to earn my approval and you want to sleep with me because that makes me seem more powerful. And I have seen so many people use that. And I have seen so many women respond in exactly the way they want them to. But now I look at my relationship and I see how he negged me in so many ways. And anybody who brings any kind of that energy to any conversation with me, that's an instant no. I don't have time for that kind of, and it doesn't even matter if they're doing it on purpose, right? They're doing it intentionally, whether or not they're conscious of it, right? They're trying to get an upper hand, but they may not be doing it consciously. But either way, I don't want people in my life who feel like it's okay to put other people down ever. Right? Don't. So it's incredibly valuable to me.
Yeah. And a lot of this conversation reminds me, we talked about media a little bit earlier. I fucking love media, and I spend probably far too much time watching TV shows, movies, reading comics, anime, all of it. But if any of you have watched BoJack Horseman, also, BoJack's not a great person, or I guess horse, but there's a quote from BoJack Horseman, the show, that I really love, and it's one I use a lot in my trainings around abusive relationships, is, when you see the world in rose-colored glasses, all of the red flags just look like flags. And I love that quote because it really shows, one, in response to the negging part of it, is if you see this person in these rose-colored glasses, I really like this person, those comments aren't going to show hey, wait a second, someone I like shouldn't talk to me this way or treat me like this, because that's just a flag there. It's not a red flag. But when you're looking back on the relationship, Heather, there's those cracks in the glasses that you can look through and actually see the red flags. And I think that's super important for people, is you might not recognize those red flags in your relationship because you're seeing that relationship through those rose-colored glasses. And that's intentional on the part of the abusive person. But when you're looking at it from the outside in, it's why it's easier for people who are your friends or your family to sometimes point out, like, hey, maybe they shouldn't treat you that way, because they're seeing those flags for what they actually are.
That is exactly why I wrote Start With No Dating, is to say, here is one technique, and here are the things to look for when you use this technique to help you spot. And I wouldn't necessarily even call them red flags. I love the concept, but I also think that a lot of people have a misunderstanding about what a red flag is. But to spot the parts of other people that do not fit with what you want in your life, right? Whether that's craptaculous behavior or just they're not a fit, right? Like I don't want to judge people for how they interact with me over, 20 bits and bobs of conversation on a dating app. But I can say, what you are coming at me with is not a fit for me. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. But also, you mentioned, people do this intentionally. Some people do. Some people just, again, subconsciously know what works, right? And they are also riding that druggy chemical train of NRE that our bodies and evolution give us for the first anywhere between 6 and 18 months for a lot of people, right? Like the chemical high literally smooths over a lot of those cracks. And that's why people call it the honeymoon period, because they are not acting that way because they're not thinking that way. They can't yet because their brains are being flooded with ooh, ah, ah. And then once they, and sometimes we, stop feeling so much of that, suddenly it's like, okay, but we've just invested all this time into creating this relationship. Now we have to battle it out. And that's when we get to the fight stage or the power struggle stage. And what I say is that's when we replace the rose-colored glasses with poop-colored glasses. And suddenly we start to see everything in stark contrast. But because we've invested so much, we feel like we have to get in there and fix it instead of leaving it, or control it, or mold it, instead of just, no, thank you, right? Which is why I like to talk about, like, how do we create a relationship that is based on boundaries versus how do we start a relationship and then try to push boundaries into it later, which is a much, much harder proposal. It can be done, but oof, so difficult.
Yeah. So speaking then of those boundaries, when we want, because I obviously, like, it's important to have boundaries in relationships. Like, that's how you're going to probably have a thriving relationship, is if you have boundaries and they're being respected by your partner. But for some people, they might not be quite sure what their boundaries are. Or when they're starting that relationship, when they're in that honeymoon phase, they might neglect their boundaries a bit because they want to be with this person. So how do we help people then recognize before they're in the relationship what their boundaries might be?
So I actually have a kind of like little, exercise that I work with clients through. And the exercise starts off with, you take a sheet of paper and you divide it into, you have 2 sheets of paper, doesn't really matter to me. And on one side, you write love, and on the other side, you write hate. And you look at past relationships, right? And you say to yourself, what worked? What did I love about that relationship? What were the things that filled me up? What are the things that even now, looking back, make me smile, right? And you write that into the love column. Into the hate column, what didn't work for you, right? And these can be the big things like, oh, he did that whole like stomping out of the house with disgust on his face thing. But it could also be the little things like he chewed with his mouth open, or he like, or he called me a nickname that I hated, or whatever it is, right? These are where you start recognizing the things about yourself and a relationship that you want to protect and prioritize, and the things that you want to start setting boundaries around, right? Like the things that you hated. Now, I mean, okay, if they chew with their mouth open, if that's going to be a deal breaker for you, get that out of the way, right? You go out with somebody, you have dinner, they chew with their mouth open. Okay, done. Thank you so much. It's been a great, time meeting you. This is not going to work for me. I wish you all of the best, right?
That's
But
what we call when you get the ick, right?
Yeah.
So
Get
you
the
get
ick,
the
exactly.
ick from someone about something that seems so minor and insignificant, but like
This is your
that is
life.
one of your deal breakers.
Yeah.
And definitely chewing with your mouth open is one of mine. Like I would, I don't think I'd make it through the meal.
If
So
if you've
like
seen me, sorry,
go ahead.
if you've seen me laughing, it's only because my wife and I have recently had this discussion where, because she's been like super stuffed up and like she's pregnant, so
Oh,
like airway also
oh
not
yeah.
like super easy for her to breathe while we're eating. Every now and then, like she'll just like take a breath like while she's eating, and I'm just like, oh, she's
Oh
eating
yeah.
with her mouth open, and it just like it kills like part of me is like, she doesn't do this when she's not pregnant and when she can legitimately breathe through her nose. But
And
it's just,
let's be fair, human procreation is absolutely disgusting.
oh yeah. Yeah. So I'm like, it's like, it's not like a deal breaker, obviously. Like, it's my
It's
wife. I love
magical,
her.
it's wonderful, but what it does to a woman's body is
Yes.
beyond heinous, right? Like
So
this
it's,
is,
she
yeah.
knows this. So like she'll do it sometimes and she'll like look at me while she's doing it. I'm like, you motherfucker.
And like exactly. So you get it, right?
Yeah.
But it's also things like, remember when OK Cupid like had all of those questions and you like answered 100 of them, right? And it was things like, this person has, a 93% match with you. When you go in and you look and they think that the sun is smaller than the earth. And you're like, well, that's a deal breaker. Thank you so much. Right. Like, or whatever it is, for me, the big one was, thinking homosexuality was a sin, because I'm not going to bring anybody into my life who cannot be around my many, many types of friends without judgment. Um, in fact, I had a guy who that was one of his things. So I wrote back and I said, thank you so much. I appreciate your message. We are not a fit. Best of luck to you. Have a nice day. And he wrote back, he said, but we're a 98% match. And I said, yeah, and I share 98% of my DNA with a chimpanzee. That 2% matters a lot. I mean, but this is the type of thing that if you stop to think about it, how are we taught to think about this? Oh, well, it's only this thing. He's such a nice guy. She's usually amazing in all of these other ways. Oh, but they help homeless people. They have to be kind and generous, right? And what's going on at home is untenable. And so we have to stop talking ourselves out of protecting our future of mental health. The way I look at it is, you are the only person you're guaranteed to be with for the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm.
That can be your best or your worst relationship. It is up to you to figure it out. And if you're constantly stomping on your own icks just to like make excuses for somebody else, that's going to be a very, very long life. Not in a good way.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me tell you, my relationship with myself, it's like middle of the road.
My relationship with myself was freaking fantastic.
It's
now
average at best.
time to do some like, serious romancing of yourself, Sean.
That's what my
When was the last
therapist is
time you
for.
bought yourself flowers?
I don't. I buy myself
See?
video games, so again, I got
Oh,
that.
well, that's, if your love language is video games, then, I think you've got it there.
My wife and I play together, so yes, it's great. But it's fun, like thinking about boundaries, because like you mentioned at the start of it, like when we think of boundaries, like we often think of like those really, really like hard, big no's.
Yeah.
But that's not what they all are.
No.
Because we all have things that we enjoy doing, that we want to be able to do with our partners. And if our partner doesn't, like you said, if they're a 98% match, but my partner wouldn't play video games with me, it's never going to work. It's something I enjoy doing. It's something I want to share with my partner. And if my wife didn't like doing it, we probably wouldn't be married. So
And
it's like,
that's absolutely valid. Like there's a lot of people who will be like, well, why don't, insert gender here, want insert attribute that I have here, right? Well, insert gender here is not a monolith, right? The ones that maybe you've been chasing or attracted to thus far in your life have not wanted that, or have wanted that but haven't wanted the rest of whatever you bring to the table. It doesn't really matter. They are not a fit, right? That's the key. Like, so in my book, Take No Shit, I talk about like the 6 different types of boundaries, right? So we've got emotional boundaries, which are like, how do you want to feel? Intellectual boundaries, where do you get your ideas and do you feel like your thoughts are validated? Physical boundaries, how do you physically show up in the world? How do you take care of yourself? Sexual boundaries, which is what most people think about when they think about boundaries, right? Like, I will not kiss on the first date, or whatever that is. But how do you, think about and navigate sex with other people? Material boundaries, stuff, money, things, right? And time boundaries. How do you prioritize your time and put time towards what's important to you? So if you look at those things, right, a boundary might be something as simple as, I always leave 3 hours at the end of a Sunday evening for a bath and a book and time to wind down before Monday morning begins, right? It just might be something as simple as that. Or it might be something like, if yelling begins in a fight, I will excuse myself for 15 minutes to calm myself down. And then I will either come back ready to talk about it, or we can talk about it at another time. There are so many different ways to set boundaries around the things that you feel are important, the way that you want to create your life and live. The challenge is, we are very rarely taught how to do this with people, organically or, intentionally. And we often don't even start thinking about it until we get past that honeymoon stage and into the fighting stage, where we're battling it out for power. It's my way. No, it's my way. No, and we still don't know how to do it. But by then, we're not knowing how to do it in a conflict, which is terrible. It's a terrible time to figure things out, right? You're already upset. You're already worried. You've already put all this time into this relationship, and now you're figuring out that it might be crapola. Like, this is going to put a lot of pressure on what we're doing. And then add to the fact that, many of us are people pleasers, and we're used to giving so much to other people to win their approval, to, have them in our lives, and so on and so forth. It's really almost impossible for some people to utter the word no. Oh, I don't know, maybe I'll think about it. No. Right? I'm not sure if I have to. No. Oh, I think I have this other thing. No. But I know people where I can do that little skit, however I make it up at any given time, And I will literally see their anxiety starting to rise just thinking about trying to say the word no. Right. So building language around boundaries, learning how to, take these tiny little steps. Again, boil that frog. Another one that I like is eat the elephant, right? How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Each tiny little nibble. Your first boundary might be, something as simple as I'm not available on Sunday evenings. Okay, right? Start there. Mm-hmm. And then go to other things.
Now, this also, especially when you mentioned we're talking about sexual boundaries and mentioned I didn't kiss on the first date, which is a very perfectly valid boundary for somebody to have.
Absolutely.
But it got me thinking about, how do we make sure that our boundaries are our boundaries?
Yes.
And not societal boundaries that we're just kind of following? Because if somebody has that boundary in their head, like, I will not kiss on the first date, and they go on a first date with someone and they're just like, I want to kiss them.
Yeah.
But that boundary that they have is like, well, I can't do that. So then there might be some shame associated then along with, well, I did it and then I broke the boundary, or I didn't do it and I really, really wish that I did. So how do we help understand that difference between a you boundary and a social boundary, or a socialized boundary?
To me, that's kind of part of, so in Take No Shit, one of the things I talk about a lot is figuring out your boundaries. And I ask hundreds of questions, just sort of, I just throw them into the text. Like, have you thought about this? Just to get you kind of like, mulling things over. And the idea about intellectual boundaries is critical thinking. Where have your ideas come from? Have your thoughts come from you? Have they been handed down to you by your family? Have they been given to you by something you saw on TV? Right? I remember just the other day, I saw, it was, I've been rewatching old episodes of Law and Order Criminal Intent. And Detective Gorin, who I absolutely adored, Vincent D'Onofrio, huge crush, said something. I don't remember what it was, but said something. And I'm like, holy fudge sickles, that's where I got that idea. Oh Lord. Oh goodness. Right? Like, how? Wow. Right? Like, that's how it stuck in my head. And it wasn't bad in this particular case, but I've had these sorts of realizations in the past where all of a sudden it came to me, this thing that I've been thinking came from something really dumb. And I don't need to be thinking that. So one of the things I talk about is in the intellectual boundaries chapter, don't believe everything you think, right? So don't take what you know, there's air quotes going on here, as gospel. Because, Elvis had an album that was like 50 million Elvis fans can't be wrong, right? And depending on whether you like Elvis or not, those 50 million people can absolutely be wrong. But a lot of us think, well, all of these people that I know, or all of these people on social media, or all of these people at, the whatever national convention or whatever, say this thing. And if that many people believe it, it must be right. They can be wrong. And is this what you want to believe? Is this what you need to believe? Is this a healthy belief for you? Have you done your own research? Right? Have you got biases that might be feeding into this? Like, has a person that interacted with you in the past affected your belief about, all men or all women, or insert all, pit bulls, or, whatever it is? Where have these ideas come from? And are they healthy? Are they good for you? Right? If I want to, I mean, I'm one of those people, if I want to kiss on the first date, I'm going to kiss on the first date. I don't mind if somebody wants to kiss on the first date or doesn't want to kiss on the first date. Like, I'm all about consent. I want us to meet where we are. However, if I'm open to a kiss and that person tries to shame me for it, they're not going to be a good match. Because to me, any type of sex is not shameful if it's two people consenting and collaborating together. If somebody tries to make that shameful, either because of their, religious beliefs or how they were brought up or whatever, then they're not going to be a good fit for me. They might be a great fit for somebody else, but they don't belong in my life because again, this goes back to, I will not be in a relationship or have somebody in my friend circles who makes me feel less than. And trying to shame somebody is one of those big trying to make you feel less than things that I will not allow. Not for me, not for others.
So I feel like something that a lot of people adhere to and has a lot to say about your relationships is your religious beliefs, your religious upbringing, right? Like, that's a huge part in a lot of people's lives. And as you're talking about like the kiss on the first date thing like that, and Sean said something about like, oh, I wish I would have, but I didn't feel like I could. Like, I am pulled back to like this teenage idea of um you know there was just, you cannot have sex before marriage, like
For sure.
you definitely can't do that, right? um and so then you've got people who maybe were in loving healthy relationships as late teens, early 20s, whatever, and felt like they could not express themselves in that way because it was wrong and it was just a societal boundary that was placed on them. And then they split up or go to college, whatever, and then they meet someone else and then they end up getting married because, in that next relationship, it was like, okay, this is just what we do. And now their first time having sex with someone, because now they're married and it's okay, ends up being this experience that they don't love, that they don't appreciate. And then maybe it's someone that ends up being not a good fit for them. But it's okay because they waited until they were married to do that.
I think
When really that first experience could have been amazing with someone else you just weren't married to. Now, I'm not saying that people should, or shouldn't have sex before marriage. That's not my place to say. I'm just saying don't let that social construct of what other people tell you, this is what's good and this is what's bad. Like,
I
don't
think
let
that
that
can
ruin
apply
your
to
life.
everything, right? Like, sex or no, like, but so I do talk about like spiritual and religious beliefs in my book, Take No Shit. And I have 3 questions about spiritual and religious beliefs. Does your current spirit, and I pulled these up because I thought this would be good. Does your current spiritual or religious practice, including none at all, feel fully aligned with your ethics and beliefs? Right? Like, so that's something like, what I've been taught served who I am right now? How do you feel when someone questions or challenges your beliefs? Right? Like, does that bring up anxiety? Does it make you want to learn more about where your beliefs come from? And then, did you consciously choose your spiritual or religious beliefs for yourself based on what fits you best? And that might be what you were raised in, but maybe you looked at other options in the world and said, no, 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 this actually really fits me deep in my heart. This is who I am as a person. I was raised by an agnostic, my mother, and an atheist, my father. When I was 4, my father told my grandmother that, he didn't believe in God. And so I wouldn't be going to church. And I threw a fit and I said, I can go to church if I want to. And I'm going with grandma. Now I did. It was a Church of Christ, and they actually then alienated me not long after in Sunday school when they told me my parents were going to hell for not attending with me. But I did throughout my childhood and my teenage years attend different religious and spiritual services with my friends. I went to Mormon Tabernacle. I, went and, experienced Jewish holidays with my friends. I went to different Christian churches. I went to Wiccan things. I went to a Unitarian Universalist church. I went with my friends and experienced the religious and spiritual things that were meaningful to them, or to their families at least. And so I had the opportunity to explore what all of that meant and choose for myself how I was going to think and feel about a god or multiple gods, or, whatever. And to me, that's something I still talk to people about and I still dig into, because I think it's important to also keep questioning myself and not believe everything I think.
Yeah, I think that's I think that's something that we should just all experience always, no matter what. Like, even if you have a firm religious upbringing that you have belief systems in, you still need to kind of see what else is out there, right? Like, and go into it with an open mind. Don't go into it with the mindset of what I already believe is correct,
Mhm.
because you don't know. I wasn't raised religiously at all. Like, I mean, my parents were both non-practicing whatever religions. And so there was just not really any kind of emphasis on that growing up. The first time I went to um a Catholic mass, right? I was sitting there and I'm listening and I'm like just, trying to absorb, and all of a sudden, like, the things that were coming out to me were like, mm-mm, mm-mm-mm. This is what we're telling people.
Yeah.
And so I think it's just as important to know what you don't want as it is to know what you do want.
Oh, yeah.
Because if I hadn't gone to that service, I wouldn't have known that, hey, my ideas don't mesh well with this.
This brand of
Um,
Catholicism. Yeah.
yeah, and so that's just as true in all the relationships in your life. Have those experiences, because you don't know what you don't want until you know you don't want it.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm a very, I'll try anything once, sometimes three times type of person. Because and I'm also one of those people, like, when I was young, and this is kind of a silly example, but it's a good one. When I was young, I loved avocados. Somewhere around like 10 or 11, I started being physically repulsed by avocado. Like, I just couldn't stand the texture. It reminded me of like slimy chicken. I don't know what happened, but physically repulsed. And for about 20 years, I would not eat avocado except to like taste it a little bit and actually gag, until I was in New York City once, and there was this Mexican restaurant that like made guacamole fresh at the table, and I'm like, okay, it's been a couple of years, I should try this again. I'm like, oh, this is good. And all of a sudden I was back to loving avocado. Like, I will eat it straight out of the avocado with a spoon given the opportunity. And this, to me, it's silly, right? But it also shows how humans change. When we talk about love languages, which, I mean, the guy who created love languages is problematic in and of himself, but the idea of love languages is very powerful for a lot of people. And when we talk about love languages, we often talk about them like they are set in stone. But what I've actually found when I talk to people is that people tend to focus more and need more of certain love languages when they haven't gotten them in past relationships. And I think that this is also true with boundaries, right? A lot of the times, what we might need to set as boundaries coming out of a particular type of relationship will be different than what we might need as boundaries 10 years into a happy relationship with a person, right? Not that we would then allow that person to get abusive or whatever, but the little things that might have tripped our triggers at the beginning are now just, oh, those are just peccadillos and they don't make me feel insecure or make me feel bad anymore. Right. So I think it's important to pay attention to how we feel, right? That moment that we feel, that's when we need to look at a boundary. The moment in a relationship where we feel resentful about something, that's when we need to look for a boundary, right? It's the little things. And if we can jump on them fast and do something about them, then maybe they won't get to be the big things.
Yeah, I think that that can go, it can go both ways. In the beginning of your relationship, there might be something that you're willing to accept because maybe it makes you feel a certain way. Like, I remember the first time when my husband and I had moved in together and like I was doing our laundry together. And I was like, oh, I'm doing our laundry together and this is so cute. And I just love doing this. And like, oh, look at me just making sure he's got clean underwear. Now I'm like, wash your own damn underwear. Like, why do I have to turn your socks inside out? I don't want to touch those. So like in the beginning of the relationship, I was like, oh, this is so cute. And now I'm like, ugh, just do it yourself, right? So your boundaries change both ways. Like maybe it was something that you liked in the beginning and now you don't anymore. And maybe there was something you were like, nope, this is a hard boundary for me. But now it's like, okay, yeah, it doesn't really bother me. Like my husband and I, we've been together for a pretty long time. And we can make fun of each other. We can say mean things to each other because we have that established relationship of love and trust, right? We know that those things that we're saying, we don't really mean them. We don't truly believe like whatever the thing is, but like we'll say it to each other just to get a rise out of each other. That's something we wouldn't have been able to do in the first few, months of our relationship or whatever, but 15 years later, it's something we both can appreciate.
Yeah.
So everything is evolving and growing, right? All the time. That includes your boundaries, that includes your relationship, that includes everything that you think you know about yourself and your partner. And I think that's a beautiful thing if you can embrace it, right?
Yes. And it's also something to turn around. It's also something to be constantly aware of. Because like I said, with my partner, with my ex-husband, the first 8 years, we're just generally dumb and young and, just dysfunctional. We didn't know how to be. I married him when I was 23, right? Like it was just, we were dumb, like really, really dumb. And then alcoholism and mental health changed who we were together. We were already like doing stupid things and, hurting each other in little ways that were fairly normal. But when the heat started getting turned up, did I recognize that there was a massive change? Yes. It took me a long time to admit, though, that massive change was going to be harmful and was not going to go away, and that he had no control over it at that time in his life, and whatever. So it's also important to realize that over time we can build up what we think is, let's say $1 million in our love bank, and then when that's drained, being aware it's drained, right? Things have changed to the point where I am fighting to survive. I am no longer thriving with my partner. Because we all want, Amanda, what you have, right? Like we all want to be with that person who, as we get older together, we get better together. We get more comfortable. We get less insecure. I've got that. It sounds like Sean has that. This is what we strive for. But when that does not happen and we begin to feel like failures and we begin to feel that shame and we put on our best, Cleopatra impression and become the queen of denial, all we do is succeed in extending that and making it worse and harming ourselves, not protecting ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And really being in a relationship, you kind of want that to be like you want to feel good in your relationships, and you want those to feel like some things that you can grow with and build with this person, because when you feel like you can't do that, it's, like you said, probably a sign that the relationship itself is probably not destined for long term.
One of my friends had said to me, how do you know if a relationship is good or not? And I have a definition for what I consider a successful relationship. And a successful relationship is two people who get far more out of the relationship than they put in. And what I mean by this is something as simple as, I'm standing and brushing my teeth in the morning and my partner walks by and he pats my butt and tells me he loves me. That took 2 seconds, 3 seconds of effort, and it fills me up, like disproportionately. And the idea that your ideal person or people, for the non-monogamous around us, will naturally do things that fill you up and will want to learn the other things they don't do naturally in order to fill you up, right? And then she said, well, how do you know when fighting is too much? And I said, that's going to be different for every single person. For me, my partner and I maybe fight once or twice a year. I hate it. I don't ever want to fight. Like, I love saying something and being heard and feeling understood and then moving on. Even if we disagree, that's fine, right? The validation and the hearing and the feeling understood is the thing for me. But, she's like, well, what if, 50% of the time, and I'm like, okay, look, if you have negative days, right? So you got your negative days, your positive days, and you have one negative day for every 3 positive days. That's 25% of your time. I'm like, that is over 100 fights a year. Well, over 75 fights a year, between 75 and 100 fights a year. Mm-hmm. Crazy, right? Like, who wants to do that? But it's going to be different for everybody, right? So are you getting far more out of the relationship than you put into it? When you have an argument, does it drain you all the way to nothing? Because to me, if I'm going to have a relationship with somebody, they should positively add value to my life that goes beyond what the rest of life drains out of me. Mm-hmm. Right? That's why we're together. Otherwise, we can just be single and take care of ourselves, right? But if we're there for each other, to boost each other and give each other the goodness to get through all that other crapola outside our bubble, that is what a successful relationship is. It's not that there's not, as you said, Amanda, it's not that there's not going to be hard times. It's not that there's not going to be crap, right? It's not that you're not going to go through, things that are going to feel very, very strained and whatever. But overall, the value that I get, and then the value that I see giving to my partner, that's going to be the key, right? So yeah, I hope our relationships make us happy.
Yeah. And that extends beyond to just your dating relationships, your friends and your family too. You should feel like those people that you are choosing to spend time with are going to not be people who are also detracting from like your overall happiness or make you feel shitty when the rest of the world or your job or whatever is also making you feel kind of shitty. Like,
yeah. If you're texting back and forth with somebody and you see a ding come in on your phone and you're like, oh, that's a sign, right? That something in that relationship isn't working for you. One thing I have never, ever not wanted to do is I see a text message come through from my sweetie and I'm like, ooh, I wonder what he has to say. Right? Like lots of other people, my ADHD is like, don't want to deal with the world right now. But him and maybe, less than a handful of other people, always, because I know the positivity they bring to my life and because I endeavor to do the same to them. So when a message comes through, I want them to know they have my attention, right? They have my love. They have whatever it is, care that I need to give them right now. They are sending me a bid for attention and I am responding. So one last thing, because I think this is important. When I talk about boundaries, I talk about boundaries and ethics being two sides of the same coin. What we want from others is critical. And one of the best ways to learn what we want from others is to give to others what they want from us, right? Because then we learn what it feels like to honor their boundaries and to care about what they want and need. And we think about that and it's like, wow, this is nice to do this for them. I deserve the same. And I know how it's supposed to look and I know it's possible. So they feed into each other, setting our boundaries and then very specifically looking for ways to honor other people's boundaries.
That also seems like it would be really helpful for those of us who are people pleasers too. Because if they're pleasing people and they're like, so this is what this is supposed to look like, it gives them really real, tangible things. Like, this is what it should look like when someone's respecting mine. So,
well, also, and this is just for the people pleasers out there, think about a time when somebody did something for you, probably in a relationship, and later on they brought it up and said, I did this for you and I didn't really want to. And think about how that made you feel, knowing that they did something for you that they didn't want to and you had no idea. Now turn that around and realize what you're doing for others and to others.
Well, with that, Heather, because that sounds like a wonderful closing point, thank you so much for joining us today. I know Amanda and I have really enjoyed this conversation. We can't wait to have you back on the podcast next season. So thanks for agreeing to come see us again. And if people were really interested in hearing about what you have going on, or if they were really interested in finding your books to check them out, where can they find all of that?
It's actually pretty easy. It's my.curiouser.life. Curiouser and Curiouser, just like in the Alice in Wonderland books. My.curiouser.life. I have my books. I have my workshops. I have a little bloggy thing. I have coaching. Yeah, that's the way to do it. Everything can be found through that, whatever that everything is. Awesome. And you can also reach out to us. We've got a little, chat that you can text us directly from the website and ask us questions and get answers.
Sweet. I will make sure I have a link to that in the show notes of the episode. So please check that out so you can go see all the things that Heather has going on, because she has a ton of amazing content for people. And thank you again for joining us today, Heather.
Thank you so much. It's been so much fun to talk about this. And I do hope that anything that I've said will help, somebody, make that change, whatever that, it might tiny little change or big change, or just realize that, hey, maybe I really need to look at this and decide whether this is right for me.
Well, I'm sure it will. So don't worry. And if worst case scenario, I'm sure it'll help Amanda and I. So you at least got two.
Yes.
Well, thanks again, Heather. And thank you all for listening today. Please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Threads at TouchySubsPod to keep up to date when we have new content and new episodes coming out. Please email us any questions, comments, or concerns to touchysubjectspodcast@gmail.com. And please rate and follow us on your favorite podcast listening app. It really does help the show out.
And in the meantime, don't be afraid to challenge, ask, and discuss when it comes to touchy subjects.